This is the blue power armoured guy, who's really going to make the heretics return their books. Let's take a look at the Chief Librarian. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy and tactics focused 40k channel, where over the last few weeks we've been looking at everything Space Marine, and this week in particular we've been looking at Faith and Fury. We've been going through the Masters of the Chapter, the augmented character upgrades that represent the very best that your chapter has to offer. And today we've got to the Chief Librarian. In this video we'll take a quick look at his rules and his potential on the battlefield. So like all the other character upgrades from Faith and Fury, the Chief Librarian upgrades any generic librarian to be a Chief Librarian for 1 command point. You can only use the stratagem once, and you can't use it if you're already including a Chief Librarian of some sort in your Space Marine army. I believe that Chief Librarian Tigurius would therefore make you unable to use this stratagem if you include him in your Ultramarines army. For that 1 command point investment, they are allowed to know another power from their chosen discipline, and they get to deny another psychic power in your opponent's psychic phase. Now it's a little bit disappointing that he can't cast another power as well. If that had been the case, then I'd say this could be a very, very strong pick for any librarian that you are bringing along. As it is, it certainly gives him another option for different powers to cast, but seeing as you're going to be typically picking the 2 that you most want to cast, having another third can be a bit redundant, as he can't cast it. A lot of the time you might also be using Smite, meaning that knowing a whole load of powers isn't necessarily going to be the most helpful. That extra deny could potentially be useful, but only really against certain foes, and if the opponent really cares that much about the denial powers, then it's often very possible just to stay outside 24 inches of the librarian if you need a key power to go off. So a small upgrade, but not something I would say was an auto-include for 1 command point. It does however allow him to use a couple of unique warlord traits. One of these is Psychic Mastery. This is a nice little bonus to casting, giving them +1 on the first psychic power they cast each turn, meaning that you can focus on the power that you really need to go off. That's a decent little buff, and it could certainly save you a command point or 2 over the course of the game. It isn't enormous though. It's only ever going to come into effect when you roll the exact number that is 1 below the power that you were trying to cast. So it's typically only going to come into effect once every 6 turns or so, and that might or might not be worth it. For me it's a little bit underwhelming, particularly when it only affects 1 of his casts. I guess it does make him a little bit harder to deny his casts as well, so that's something as well. His other warlord trait is High Scholar of the Librarius, and it gives him the option to know psychic powers from any discipline that he has access to, rather than just 1. I think that this is actually really quite strong, as it can allow you to pick the best power from your Codex supplements psychic powers, and also combine it with something great from the Librarius discipline. One of my personal favourites is Might of Heroes from Librarius, giving a big vehicle toughness 9, or a fighty character +1 strength attack and toughness, is a very strong buff to be throwing around, so that's a nice little option to have. If you really want that power and something from a supplement book, then this could well be worth 1 command point. Again, I don't think that this is an auto-include, but it does allow you to cast powers from different disciplines, which usually you could only do if you had 2 librarians. Next we have the relics. First we have Vinculum Vitae. This is a fancy force sword that adds +1 to its strength, and if you wound on a 6, then it inflicts D3 mortal wounds instead of its normal damage. So it's a small combat buff to the librarian. In general, you probably aren't going to want him to be seeking out close combat himself, but it could potentially help out in a pinch. I think I'd be more tempted to tool up captains or even chaplains for combat before I buff the librarian, but it could be quite fun, particularly combined with some of the various fun psychic powers to boost his stat line. The other option is Neural Shroud. This allows you to add 12 inch to the range of the Psychic Hood ability. As he gets 2 denies, this isn't a bad upgrade to those denies, and it could help you put a bit of a spanner in the works for your opponent's psychic phase. Again though, definitely bear in mind that having that +1 is only going to matter if you literally roll 1 below what your opponent has cast on 2 dice. So while it is a buff, it is a small buff. Potentially could be worth it if you're fighting a foe with game-changing psychic powers and you need absolutely every chance to deny every single one. So overall, I think that the Chief Librarian is an interesting little upgrade. Bit of a shame that he doesn't have any way of accessing an additional cast. I think that would have been the real winner out of this if he'd been able to do it in any way through the warlord traits or relics. I think that I'd only typically upgrade the Librarian to this with the stratagem after I'd seen my opponent's army, which I believe is the way that these stratagems work, but please correct me if I'm wrong. I'd say the best use out of this particular Librarian is just to make him a bit of a psychic denial machine, and I think I'd typically just save my command points for use elsewhere in the many other ways that we can use them as Space Marines. Please let me know what your thoughts on this are. If there's anything that you'd really like to use a Chief Librarian for, then please point it out down in the comments. There are a lot of psychic powers available to the Space Marines now. We have 42, I believe, including the regular book powers and 6 powers from each of the supplement books. I think I would have preferred it if the Psychic Awakening had awakened the Chief Librarians to be able to cast 3 powers, but I guess that's just me. As always, thank you for listening to Auspex Tactics. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see similar content. We've only got 2 of the Masters of the Chapters to go now, the Chapter Champion and the Master of Sanctity, so we'll be covering them later this week. Thanks again for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next video.